Welcome to the Insight podcast. Joining me on the show today is Suzy Reading. Suzy is an author and coaching psychologist specialising in self-care, resilience, stress management, healthy lifestyle change, and well-being. The main theme of this episode is self-talk. So I talked to Suzy about how common negative self-talk is and how it affects people, why it is that we talk to ourselves so harshly, the difference between thoughts that arise naturally and self-talk, how we can stop being so critical and nasty to ourselves, how to talk to yourself when you feel embarrassed, ashamed, or guilty, the epidemic of low self-worth and what to do about it, and much more. Right, before we start, I've got a small favour to ask. If you haven't already, please do hit the follow button wherever you're tuning into this episode. And then if you've been listening to the show for a while, I'd really appreciate it if you rated the show too. This will help more listeners discover the podcast and the insights from all of my amazing guests. Thank you. So now for my conversation with Suzy Reading. Enjoy. Right, self-talk. I think it's quite telling that when I think of self-talk, I immediately go to negative self-talk. And I think maybe this is the reality for most people, that the way that they talk to themselves is perhaps not in the kindest tone, is it? I'm wondering what are your thoughts, Suzy, on the state of the way that people talk to themselves?
Okay. Yeah, this is something I hear often in my consulting room. The kind of phrases that I hear are, I should be stronger, I should be more resilient, I should be coping better, I shouldn't be having such a tough time, I should be more grateful, right? We are literally beating ourselves with these words like a stick. Yeah.
So it's very common, you see it. Those words are interesting. I can definitely identify with some of those. How do you see it affecting people? You know, is it just, this is the conversations that they're having in their mind, but actually it's not affecting them outwardly. It's not affecting the people around them. It's not affecting anything else. So is it really that big a deal? Or does this play out in real life, the way that we're talking to ourselves like that?
Yeah, I think it has real life consequences. Yeah, when we are constantly denigrating ourselves, disrespecting ourselves, tearing ourselves down, gaslighting ourselves, it has a significant impact on our mood, on our energy levels, on our self-confidence, our self-esteem. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I really think it's something we need to take a look at and address.
Yeah. I kind of think, going back thousands of years ago, what could possibly be the advantage of talking to ourselves like this? What it seems to be, I might be wrong, but it seems to be kind of the default is to not celebrate ourselves and to not talk to ourselves nicely. The default seems to be to talk down to yourself and be worried and imagine the worst case scenario. Like, am I wrong in that, or what's going on?
Okay.
What's going on there?
So I think there's definitely a time and a place for, I'm going to say it, catastrophic thinking. Okay, and I think this is probably where we need to make that distinction between thoughts and between self-talk, because this is fundamental, right? Thoughts happen to us. We don't choose our thoughts. Our self-talk is something that we have conscious control over, right? So there's no point saying to ourselves, I must only think positive, because you don't control your thoughts, okay? And in terms of that question of what's the purpose for those kind of thoughts, well, when we do catastrophize or we do these sort of, worst case scenario thinking, there's an opportunity to do some problem solving in that, okay? We do some proactive, if this happened, then I could do this. That's useful, okay? If that catastrophic thought is then followed with a whole bunch of self-talk of, I'm doomed, it's this, it's I can't do anything about it. It's all, we can see how that doesn't help us. Okay, so I think that that's a really fundamental distinction. You don't choose your thoughts, they happen to you. So we make peace with our thoughts. It's about cultivating a healthy relationship with our thoughts, understanding that they are just a passing state. A thought is not necessarily a fact. A thought is not necessarily a prediction. A thought is not necessarily a prophecy of what's to come. It's just a passing state. However, what we say to ourselves in response to our thoughts is really significant, because we can either build ourselves up, we can dispassionately take a look at our actions. There's also a place for that. Let's evaluate, let's take a look. If I'm feeling embarrassed, if I'm feeling guilty, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, take a look. Is there some kind of repair that we need to do? Is there a lesson that we need to learn? Right? There's a place for these feelings and thoughts along self-talk along those lines as well. But at its heart, I don't see any benefit in speaking to ourselves in any other way than is respectful and coaxing and encouraging.
I'm going to come back to that. But before I do, I think, as you said, that is a really interesting distinction. And it's not something that I'd thought about at all. The difference between the thought that pops into your head and actually kind of a longer form entry into that inner journal that we have, which is that kind of self-talk. So how can someone go about recognizing that more often in themselves? How can they notice the difference? And I guess to start with that work around recognizing that a thought is just a thought. Are there any stepping stones to get to that place? I feel like I've tried to work on this a lot in my life in the past couple of years, and maybe it's taken some, quite a consistent period of meditating and self-reflection and things, and just getting to speak to people like you, and also reading some fantastic psychologists and things and psychoanalysts. It's like, okay, this is something I wasn't taught as a child, that a thought is just a thought, because for a long time, if a thought popped up, I'd go along with that and go, oh, that must be true because I thought it. Whereas actually we need to be as I understand it, kind of the watcher, the observer of our thoughts and noticing when they come up. So are there any first steps? And then, let's just stick with that. Any first steps to recognizing that a thought is just a thought, other than meditation, or is that the first step? I don't know.
I'd actually suggest that I think it's twofold. Because I think sometimes we need to have a look at the beliefs that we have in play first.
Right.
Okay, so now a belief, this is something that either we've been told often by someone else and we hold it to be true, or it's something we've told ourselves, or sometimes it's a combination of both of those things. But essentially, it is started with some kind of communication that we now invest our value system in, our identity in. Okay, so if someone says to me, I can't change my self-talk, then there's no point us looking at ways to, unpick until we've had a look at that belief. So I would encourage people, what are the beliefs that come up for you around how we treat ourselves, whether it's okay to advocate for ourselves? Can we look at this belief that we need to be punitive to garner better performance? Because I wonder historically whether we did have the same level of negative self-talk, historically. I think it's because we've been raised with this idea of, there's the stick. There's more stick than carrot in our society. And we think, to perform better, I've got to be tough on myself. And this is the biggest lesson that I learned. The first lesson that I learned in changing my self-talk came from my sporting career. I used to be a figure skater growing up in Australia. And I was incredibly tough on myself. And I was a real perfectionist. And I wanted everyone to know that if I didn't miss a trick, I was disgusted with myself. Right? And I thought that was the way, push harder, be tougher on myself. I thought that was the way to perform better. And I learnt hard and fast that it wasn't. Right? That was a good way to be labelled a hothead. That was a great way to sabotage yourself. That was a great way to injure yourself, throwing yourself around like a twit. And I tell you what, the lesson really dropped in deeper when I had a knee injury that meant I had two alternatives. I could either have surgery or I could stop doing the tricks, doing the jumps for a while and just work on strengthening my legs and doing other rehab. And I tell you what, it was a period of a couple of months where I couldn't do the jumps and the tricks. So it wasn't a matter of I must impress and, perform. It was a matter of I'm going to ice skate because I love it. And I was doing these amazing edge work series. And what I learned in that experience was that it was actually really hard to do all the in-between stuff. And I was saying to myself, do you know what? I want this chapter to be different. I'm aware that what I was doing before wasn't really working. So let's try something else. And I started speaking to myself with dignity and respect. And if something didn't quite go right, I'd say, oh, okay, so that didn't work, what will? And I tell you what, my performance improved. And when I was able to jump again, I skated out of my skin like I'd never skated before. And it was like, oh my God, the secret sauce is actually speaking to ourselves with kind encouragement, not trash talking ourselves. Okay? So that's the first lesson. Can I share where the lesson dropped in deeper, Sam?
Of course.
And then we'll come back to how we can create this change. The second life lesson was when my firstborn was 4 months old. My dad was in a rehab hospital. He'd had a breathing failure when my daughter was born and spent 4 months in intensive care. He'd moved out of the intensive care unit into a high-level rehabilitation unit. He was literally trying to learn how to breathe again. And my mum had been the most incredible advocate because while Dad couldn't obviously breathe for himself, he couldn't speak for himself. So my mum spent 7 days a week at hospital looking after him. When my firstborn was 4 months old, my mum ended up in intensive care herself. She ran herself ragged, right? So I've got both parents in hospital. I've got a 4-month-old who didn't sleep for more than 3 hours at a time. Both parents needed things from me. And it was just this collision of life events. And in that moment, there was not a single space for anything more in terms of negative, nasty, doubting. And my self-talk, I tell you what, I had to clean it up like that because I wasn't going to make it otherwise. In that moment, it was like life is so hard, I couldn't add to my burden with another negative comment. And I made the commitment to self, and it really is a commitment to self. From that life experience, I'm just not going to add to my burden by being horrible to myself. I'll still hold myself accountable, right? This doesn't absolve us from, am I doing the right thing here? Am I in alignment with my moral code? But I will do that in a way that doesn't involve a character assassination.
This is powerful stuff. Recognizing that it's not helpful. It's not adding. You're just, that's not making you any more productive or any more better equipped to deal with the challenges that you're facing. You've already got a lot on your plate, so you might as well at least try and deal with it in some kind of kind and compassionate way. That's so interesting. And you brought up your sports psychology background and that side of things. And that's something that I absolutely love. My favorite thing to watch on Netflix are the sports documentaries, The Last Dance about Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls and other ones like how that is so good, isn't it? I think I've watched it twice all the way through. It's fascinating to me, the mindset of athletes and what we can learn and apply to our everyday lives. But I guess that this is part of the problem though, isn't it? Someone like Michael Jordan that we look up to and all these other people that we look up to that have been hugely successful, we hear about their self-talk and how critical they were of not only themselves, but their teammates around them. I hear that Michael Jordan was horrible to the people around him and would, berate them for missing shots and things. So what do we do about that? How do we I'm struggling to find the phrase, but yeah, how do we understand that the fact that there are all the people that seem to be hugely successful in sport and in other areas of their life, that they do seem to talk to themselves like that, and they are really harsh on themselves. And so we think that is the example of how to be successful and how to achieve our goals, because everyone else seems to be doing like that. I don't see the documentaries about the really successful athletes who are always talking kindly to themselves.
It's a really interesting observation, because I'm sure there are.
There must be, of course, yeah.
And do you know what? And my question would be, I wonder how successful they could have been if actually they were a little more tender with themselves and their colleagues. I wonder.
Yeah, they were successful in spite of it, not because of.
In spite of it. Absolutely. I have a whole bunch of people coming to me saying, this self-sabotaging behavior really helps me. And I'm like, okay, but I wonder what life would look like if you had a different mechanism in place. Let's take a look. I think people can be incredibly successful in spite of these things. So how do we actually create that change, Sam? I think that's a really useful starting point. Yeah, and you've mentioned meditation, and essentially it is awareness. Can't change anything if you're unaware of it. So essentially it's waking up and noticing. But we've got to make that distinction between thought that happens to you. You make peace with all thoughts. They come and they go. But what you then respond to how you respond to that, that's where your sphere of influence lies. That's what we play with. Okay? And so we just begin by noticing, what are we saying to ourselves in response to our thoughts? Is that thing constructive? Is that response useful? Is it helpful? How does it make us feel? What effect does it have on our nervous system? Yeah? And let's cultivate dialogue that is supportive. If you wouldn't say it to someone that you care about, and sometimes that's a bad example because sometimes we do say nasty things to people we care about. If you wouldn't say it to someone else, is it really befitting to say to yourself? But when we do make an error, because I still notice it, there are sometimes, I'll say something horrible to myself, but I'll have a little giggle. I say, well, there's that old habit again. There it is, right? This is not then something that we berate ourselves over. We notice, we reframe without character assassination, and we get on with it. And with practice, we build the skill.
Mm-hmm. It must be hard, though, for people that have seen results from talking to themselves like that. Like, I feel like I have, there's been periods where I've gone through where I'm talking to myself harshly because I know I want to make a change. I don't know, maybe I'm noticing that I've put a little bit of weight on. So I know that I want to get in the gym more, and I know that I want to eat a little differently, or I don't know, there's a job that I want to apply for or something coming up, and I want to be hard on myself so I know that I can grow and improve. But I don't know if I'm laboring the point here, but is what you're saying that's just not the solution at all? It's not the solution, but it's hard. It's hard when people
can be.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I think we can be disciplined,
right,
and we can be goal directed. But we can do it in a way where we remain on our own side. Yeah, that's what I believe. And I think it might be a matter of take a look, experiment and see what works. But certainly in my experience, if I'm denigrating myself, if I'm saying anything to myself that doesn't encourage, uplift. And I'm not saying this is Pollyanna stuff. I'm not saying this is only positive thoughts. It's not that. Yeah. There's an opportunity to say, when you do this, this is how you'll feel. What do you want to keep choosing? Yeah. Do you see the distinction?
Yeah. But I think it would be interesting to talk more about that, because some people, might be listening or see things on social media about positive self-talk and always being really optimistic and looking at yourself in the mirror and telling yourself how wonderful you are and beautiful you are. And it's like, right. Will that always be effective necessarily? Does that sound a little bit fluffy to some people? So, because we've brought up positive self-talk in the past, or always, or going through life thinking that you're always going to be positive about everything, and we've mentioned it already.
God, no.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But it's not always going to be.
So important. Oh, no, absolutely not. No, and this. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so let's broaden this conversation to let's understand that mental health is not the absence of unpleasant thoughts, difficult experiences in response to life. Emotional health is not the absence of uncomfortable feelings, okay? Mental health refers to our ability to cope with stressors in life, yeah? Emotional health is our ability to move through all of our emotions in a safe and healthy way. We are not aspiring to a life where we don't have negative thinking, where we don't struggle. We're not even aspiring to a life where sometimes, we will feel anxious and depressed in response to what's happening in our lives, because that's the natural human response to loss or suffering. Like that's normal. And it's really important. I think, again, it's these conversations about resilience that sometimes lead people to believe that resilience means that we're unaffected. It's not. Yeah, you still get knocked for six. It just means that you get back up. Yeah? So we don't want to languish about in negativity, but that's not to say that we don't say, I'm having a really shit time. This is really hard. I am hurting here. That's honest dialogue. But if we're then giving ourselves grief for feeling like that, do you see the distinction? Yeah? And it's not about, that I'm in the midst of this and this is tough, but that person's got it so much worse, so I don't have a right. I must just be grateful. Again, there's this notion that, you grow through what you go through. And that's true. Post-traumatic growth is very real. And I think at the right point in someone's healing journey, that can be really galvanizing to think about, I weathered that adversity, but wow, look at how I've grown. But if someone in the midst of all of that turmoil is told, find your silver lining, or everything happens for a reason, it's just like, okay, so now I don't only have to just weather this and act like I'm unaffected. Now I've got to grow and be better as a result and be thankful for it. Like that's the narrative that we're hearing these days. And I'm when positive psychology emerged like 2 decades ago, I was so excited because it made sense of so many things. And instead of just looking at what's not working, we were looking at the building blocks of a well-lived life. Yeah. And we've got 20 years of research into the building blocks of well-being, and it's fantastic. However, when these things are twisted to make people who are having a tough time already feel even worse about themselves, yeah, we need to open our eyes and take a look at how we're using these concepts and these practices.
Yeah. If you're in the midst of something really traumatic and someone tells you, but you'll be a better person after this, you'll be stronger. It's like, okay, yeah, but that, exactly. That doesn't really help the fact that this is really hard for me right now. And this is where ACT comes into play, isn't it? Acceptance and commitment therapy. And I've had the privilege of talking to so many people in that space like yourself, and it's just opened up my eyes. It's so interesting. What do you also think about, this is kind of, I guess, what you're talking about, that we're having a much wider conversation about mental health, and we see it on social media, and that's positive that people are able to talk more about these things. But are we in a situation where, one, as you said, that where was I going with this? That kind of any little thing that comes up, it's like, my mental health is really suffering, and it's like, well, but this is just part of life. This is what we go through. and also kind of linked to that you might go through an experience and you're feeling really low, and you're very like, people will be very quick to use therapy talk to label that thing and say, oh, this is what we've got and this is what you need to do about it. Or yes, you're an anxious person, I'm going to label you with that, or label yourself. So is it like, yeah, where's that balance? We're having more of a conversation about mental health, which is great, but at the same time, is there lots of kind of self-diagnosis going on and looking at these TikTok influencers and deciding, oh yeah, I must have that thing that they're talking about. I must have ADHD and things because I recognize all these symptoms in myself. And so I must have that as well. And what do I do about it? And getting ourselves in this complete, state and juggling all of that.
I think you raised some really good points there, Sam. Yeah. I think it's fantastic that we are having a far more open and honest dialogue around mental health and what constitutes a normal response to challenging times, even a normal response to sleeplessness, right? The fact is there are a whole host of consequences of impaired sleep that would have anyone thinking, am I anxious? Have I got depression? Actually, you're sleep deprived. Yeah. And we need to talk about it. We need to take a look at the sources that we're getting this information from, because it's very noisy out there and it's very hard to understand who is a reputable source. Yeah. But it's great that we're having these conversations. And I think even that notion of a diagnosis, that's an interesting question. It really is, because for some people, understanding that, oh, I have this condition, oh, that's what it is, that provides enormous relief. Now, for others, they might feel like maybe that stigmatizes how I'm feeling. That somehow, pathologizes my feelings. Now, I can remember in the midst of, what I experienced when I had my firstborn, I witnessed my father having a breathing failure. And he survived for 15 months after that. But I witnessed a few medical emergencies that were deeply traumatizing. And I can remember sort of a year down the track, there was a suggestion of postnatal depression. And I'm like, yeah, it could be that. But it could also be, I just saw some horrifying stuff. Someone I deeply care about suffering. I haven't slept for more than 3 or 4 hours at a stretch for a year now. Is it exhaustion or is it PND? Now, for some people, that label of PND is really helpful. And unfortunately, in modern society that we live in, you got to tick the boxes. You've got to have this number of symptoms to get the diagnosis so that you can get the support. That's the troubling thing. Yeah? It's very hard to get support unless you've hit the right number of criteria. Like there's this sliding scale of, maybe, but sorry, you miss out because you haven't got, you hear me?
Yeah, for sure. It's so complicated, isn't it? And something like that.
It's really complicated.
Do you also find that there's kind of a time frame on which the sympathy from the people around you will last? Something like what you experience with your dad, what people go through with grief in other ways as well, that kind of will give you this much time to grieve and be affected by it. But it's been a couple of months now, so that's enough, maybe. Like, I'm not sure what else I can say to you. And I always find that really fascinating. It's a conversation that I had with Neve Fitzpatrick when we talked about grief, and she was telling about the loss of her sister. And it's kind of like there's a societal norm of how long you should take. And if you take longer than that, then our sympathies run out. If you take shorter than that, like, oh, this person's over it too quickly. What's going on there? Like, how are they done already? And it kind of not that awareness that we're all different and there's so many factors at play. That's an interesting side of it as well, isn't it?
It really is. And given that grief is something that we will all encounter, how ill-equipped are we as a society to respond with compassion to someone in the midst of loss? It's really tough. And I would even go so far as to say that Sometimes the disappearing act that people experience, I mean, that can create a secondary wound in the midst of loss, where you're like, wow, I really thought that person would be there. And they weren't. And that can be incredibly painful. Or just, the fallout, where people don't know what to say, so they don't say anything at all. I think grief's a really tricky one, because if I think about what I needed in the midst of my grief, and working as I do with grief, with hundreds of people, and hearing what this individual needed as opposed to what this individual needed, we need something that's so nuanced and individualized. So even when you've had your own experience of grief and you think, oh, I know what this is about, I know what to say, I know what to offer, I know the support that will help, it might be completely different to what someone else needs. So we do need to we need to be brave and still have those conversations, but it's okay to say, how can I be here for you? How can I support you? What do you need? Yeah, let's have a conversation about that. But grief is a really big one when it comes to, navigating relationships.
Yeah.
And there is no expiry date. There is no right way to grieve. Yeah.
That's an important reminder for people. So coming back to self-talk, I just turned 37 about a month ago, and I feel like I'm a little bit exhausted by the thoughts that go around in my head. I can be quite harsh on myself. I can doubt myself. I can doubt the people around me as well. And as much as I recognize that and I want to make changes, I feel like there's still some steps I could take. Now, I feel like we have covered that in some ways. We've talked about this, recognizing the difference between thoughts and self-talk. And you mentioned kind of recognize how it leaves you feeling and how it affects your nervous system. And that just makes me, think again, coming back, is that the first step to making improvements, kind of recognizing how you feel when you talk to yourself and how you feel when you talk to yourself much more kindly other than not so kindly. And those are first steps.
Yeah, first step is just to notice. First step is to, what am I saying to myself? Does this serve me? How can I reframe this to something that galvanizes me? And maybe it would be helpful to look at some concrete examples.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I've written a few down. So let's think about what we might say to ourselves in the midst of making a mistake. Okay. Now we can say, you idiot, and a host of other expletives. And I question how valuable that is. Yeah, because does that actually expedite our learning? I'm not sure it does. So what I would say to myself, if I've made a mistake, the first thing I'd say is, okay, hang on. No one gets it right all the time. But what am I learning here? Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes, but what's now required? And that allows me to move into that next phase much swifter, rather than a whole heap of self-criticism. Yeah. So I give myself permission to be human. When I give myself permission to be human, I soothe the stress response so that I can actually make those reparations sooner. I can do more effective problem solving. Okay. What about another one? What about noticing in a chat about guilt? I'm a horrible person. I'm unworthy, right? How often do these thoughts of not enoughness come up? Okay, so what could we say to ourselves in that instance? Okay, the presence of guilt gives us an opportunity to check in with our moral compass. Doesn't actually mean we've made a misstep. Yeah, sometimes we feel guilty when actually we haven't actually done something wrong. Maybe it's we want to do that nourishing thing and society tells us you snooze, you lose. You must keep going until you've delivered your entire to-do list and cleared your inbox, which will never happen. Okay, and we can say to ourselves, actually, I'm not transgressing my moral code. It's okay for me to do this thing. I'm connecting with my purpose. The reason why I'm doing this thing is to resource myself so that I can better meet the demands of my day. Do I need to feel guilty about that? No, I don't. Can you see that's constructive self-talk, where we're interrogating these feelings and connecting with moral compass? I think our values need to guide us here. Yeah, let your values help you choose how you speak to yourself. And here's the thing: can we allow our values to also include ourselves? Yeah, this sense of we want to be kind and generous and loving, compassionate human beings, but those values are incomplete if they don't also include ourselves. Yeah? Okay. Some other examples. Is this useful, Sam?
It's really useful. And I'm glad you just kind of, I took the initiative to say, shall I just give you some concrete examples? Because I think I was kind of floating around the point and I was maybe repeating myself. And this is why you're such a pro, Suzy,
No,
because
it makes perfect sense.
but you recognize that. And I think that this is the most useful thing for our listeners, which I didn't quite get to, but just you saying, concrete examples. And I think it's brilliant. Yeah. The mistakes, guilt, these are both things that I can resonate with. So I found that really helpful. If there are any more examples, I think that would be great.
Yeah. So what about, okay, so we're sort of dealing with these perfectionistic thoughts, this guilt. Embarrassment is another one. Oh my God, how could I do that? We could spend half an hour doing that. Okay, so if we're noticing that we're embarrassed, it suggests to us that, okay, maybe next time I might try something different. So my self-talk would be around, okay, what didn't work this time? What are some alternatives? And if there's something I'm definitely going to commit to doing differently next time, it's going to be this. That's useful self-talk. Yeah. What about fear? Anxiety. That's another big one. Okay. So if we're noticing the presence of anxious thoughts or anxious sensations, again, these things happen to us. We can't eradicate them. But what we can change is, instead of us going down this rabbit hole of, I hate this feeling, I feel unsafe, I'm worried about this, and this like downward spiral, we can say to ourselves, I'm noticing the presence. Here's ACT coming into the fore. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm a huge fan. I'm noticing the presence of an anxious thought. I'm noticing the presence of an anxious feeling, but I'm going to check in and I'm going to gently get curious about this. I'm going to ask myself, actually, am I in danger here? Is there a threat? Now, sometimes there might be something significant that is like job insecurity, financial insecurity. There's something genuinely causing that feeling or those worried thoughts. And we can say to ourselves, here's probably the most healing thing I've ever been on the receiving end of. Of course you feel as you do. These are worrying times. It's okay to worry. Yeah? Or maybe we could say something like, give myself permission to feel, but I don't have to do it on my own. And that's where we can reach out for support.
Yeah. All really good concrete examples. And the one that you mentioned about that kind of guilt or embarrassment or shame, something that I can't remember who said it recently, but it was one of those aha moments when if you look at your embarrassment or shame as a sign of growth, it's like, well, you're really ashamed that you acted in that way, or you're embarrassed that you were to talk to someone in your family that way. It's like, it's a horrible feeling. It's not a great feeling, but it's good that you're recognizing that and thinking, well, I'm not going to do that again then. I'm not going to act that way because I must be embarrassed. If I'm embarrassed by it, then it must mean that it's not lining up with my values. It's not really who I want to be. It's not the person that I want to become. So I can kind of cringe at the way I've acted in the past, but maybe that's a good thing. I'm cringing because I don't want to act like that again. And so I've recognized that. And so moving forward, when the same situation presents itself, I'll choose, hopefully, the better path. I hope.
Exactly. And in the midst of that, we say to ourselves, yes, I made a misstep there. That was an error. I don't want to do that again. And the fact that we care so deeply about not doing it again shows who we are.
Yeah.
And we can, be galvanized by that rather than the negative self-talk that hammers home how horrible we are and just, sucks the life force out of us.
Yeah. Which is serving no purpose. Just, you're an idiot.
Doesn't change what happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it doesn't change anything moving forward either if you're just berating yourself for the way you did act rather than thinking, well, how do I want to act the next time this comes up?
Exactly.
Okay.
I would suggest the fact is it's even more depleting, which means that we're more likely to make other errors.
Yeah.
Right? Because how well resourced we are has a huge impact on what comes out of our mouth next. Yeah? So here it is, the secret sauce. Compassionate, coaxing, encouraging inner dialogue.
That's great. Well, this is something that I have been thinking a lot about. It's something that I want to, examine in myself, my self-talk, the self-talk of, well, even not the self-talk of the people around me, but what they share about the self-talk of themselves.
What they say out loud.
Yeah, they say out loud to themselves.
Yes, that's still self-talk. Yeah, it might be things that they say out loud. I will often do the same, Sam. Like, someone will say something really unfair, and I was like, can we take a look at that?
Yeah, instead of just kind of nodding along and going, right, and just, going on with the conversation. You have to be a little bit brave, don't you? And it could be a little bit awkward to the people around you. But if you say, hold on, what did you just say to yourself? In fact, my brother did it to me the other day. What was it that I said in front of him? I can't remember what. I can't remember if it was to do with fitness or a race or if it was something at work. I really can't remember. But I was like, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that. And my brother called me out on it, and I love him for it. He just was like, Sam, can you stop talking to yourself like that? And I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. I think I gave him a big hug afterwards, and it was kind of like, yeah, thanks for calling that out. Like, why am I talking like that? And it's kind of like that's the what is it? The position, the service we need to provide to the people around us, kind of call out that self-talk that they're saying out loud to themselves and say, like, do you really think like that? Or is that really the best approach?
Yeah. I think we also need to sort of recognize just how hard it is to make that change, Sam. Like, can we also just acknowledge that? I think it's really important because so many people have fallen into a very, very deep habit when it comes to that negative inner dialogue. And they might genuinely feel like, I can't change it, but we can change it. I promise you, we can change it. And I just want to offer up, we sort of, modern society glorifies thinking. Like, we glorify the mind over the body, don't we? Like, to the point where if we've got some kind of unhelpful thought, we say to ourselves, I've got to think my way out of it. Like, that's the best approach. Now, I would suggest sometimes you just need to drink a glass of water. You need to eat something. You need to move your body. Sedentary periods are like the kibosh for mental clarity. You need a dose of nature therapy. We might need a hug. Yeah, we might need some fresh air. We might need to have a nap. Okay? So often people say to themselves, oh, I'm so awful at this. I'm rubbish at this. And they're hangry. Right? Okay, so it doesn't always have to be, I must change my self-talk via a cognitive strategy. Sometimes it's as simple as making sure you've hydrated yourself. And there's another little strategy that I think might be really helpful to share, in that I think we can use our body more to cultivate more constructive self-talk. Now, I don't know if you notice, but I do this a lot. Tender gestures. Yeah? I mean, try it with me, Sam. If you do this, all right? If you do this, I mean, it reminds us that we're real, we're a human being. There's this flesh and this body, and that I hope will help people. I'm not a machine. Yeah. But let's try this one. If you cradle your chin in your hands, just soften into that. Make it yours. Yeah. Now, what I notice is that when I do this tender gesture, I find it literally impossible to trash talk myself. Yeah. So sometimes we need a little circuit breaker. Yeah. So we can use movement. We can use the breath. We can use touch. as another way in. Yeah? It doesn't always have to be change self-talk via more talk. Yeah? I hope that can be a tangible, juicy place to start for people.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of a phrase, I think it's from Rich Roll, who says, mood follows action. Like you can't think yourself out of a bad mood, in spite of the, like you said, what we're told that, oh well, you just need to change your thought pattern.
Just think positive.
Yeah, just think positive.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, mood follows action. You've got to, it will be helpful if you take some action. And like you said, moving the body is one of the quickest ways. Breath work as well is very quick, isn't it? You know, a certain type of breath, you could kind of quickly soothe, change your nervous system. And other people talk about there's not many problems that can't be solved by a good night's sleep, talking to a friend, going for a long walk. You know, do all of those things first and then come back to what's bothering you and see if things have changed. I think it's a vital point to make. I really appreciate that, Suzy. One other thing I want to talk to you about is that you're very active on social media and you talk about some of the current issues that are affecting people, whether that's work, expectations at work, loneliness, parenting. And this doesn't have to be linked to self-talk, but from your point of view, is there anything that's kind of the biggest thing that's affecting people at the moment? What are you seeing on social media and maybe even in the people that you work with as well? What's really affecting people at the moment? And is there, if you could talk to the whole nation about that topic, are there any solutions that you'd put up? And I know that's a very it's a big question. Then it's not like it could just be solved overnight. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, and do you know what? It does link back to the topic of self-talk. Okay. So the biggest thing that I am seeing recurrently in my consulting room, at the school gates, in conversation with friends, on social media, is I think there is a pandemic of not enoughness. Okay? I am seeing people questioning their worth all day, every day. And I think this is the next thing that I'm trying to understand. So having written a whole bunch of books about self-care and everyone going, yeah, I'm going to do it. Still, a decade later, people feel like it's not okay to do it. And it comes back to this fundamental feeling that it's not okay for us to tend to ourselves, to nourish ourselves. And it's all this, it's underpinned by this fundamental question of, am I a good person? Am I a bad person? And I think it's woven into how we raise our children. I've even noticed that, we sort of think that the kids who will assume they're bad are the ones that get punished all the time or the ones that are neglected, right? And my heart goes out to anyone that's had those experiences. But I would suggest that so many common parenting practices that even present, compassionate, loving parents use, even things like telling your kid 100 times a day that they're good. Yeah? The fact that you tell them that they're good will then have them wondering that, but when does that goodness stop? Hang on, and if I stop doing that thing that makes everyone happy, am I then bad? Oh my God. And it has such far-reaching consequences to the point where people feel they can't rest, they can't prioritize themselves, they can't offer an opinion, they can't say no. This is what we're grappling with. So this fundamental feeling of not enoughness.
Yeah. Is that because for the last couple of decades, we have been telling children how amazing they are and they're perfect the way they are and you're beautiful and you're the best at everything? Is that?
There's some of that. There's some of that, but there's also this whole notion that a good baby is one that doesn't cry.
Yes, doesn't make a fuss.
A good child doesn't talk back to adults. A good human being is selfless. Yes, a good human being doesn't need anybody else, is self-reliant, is, oh my God. So we feel guilty for having needs and emotions. Yeah. And these are the very things that make us human.
What if someone listens to this and says, okay, I get what you're saying about self-worth and self-care and looking after themselves, that people need to be doing more of that. What if someone listening saying, well, from what I see, that's all people are doing. All people are doing is, does that make sense, your sentence? All that people are doing is looking after themselves, buying things for themselves, eating the food that they want, going for massages, having a bath. Having a bath, that sounds really lame, but you know.
I know what you're saying.
What I'm saying, yeah?
These things have been commoditized. Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. But I would suggest that the vast majority of people who are ethically minded, who really care about underprivileged people, who would do anything that they can in their power to protect those who can't protect themselves, feel incredibly guilty for even allowing a little of their attention to turn inwards. Right. Okay? Yeah? The vast majority of people. Yeah? And of course, there are some people who really could do with a dose of have a focus on that person for a change instead of yourself. Right? This is not a blanket statement, but I think when we come from a place of I am worthy. I am worthy of love, respect, and care. It resources us to better protect others who can't advocate for themselves.
Love it. Right. I think that sounds like a good place to start to wrap up, Suzy. Thanks so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
As you know, I finish with 3 kind of shorter, quick fire questions, if you're ready for those.
I am.
First one, what's one lesson you wish you'd have been taught as a child?
Okay, easy one. That lesson is, I wish I was taught it was okay not to be selfless. Shock horror, okay? But can I just make a distinction? Like, if you're not we sort of come into this binary thinking of I'm either selfless or I'm selfish, okay? I want to say that you can be a generous, loving, caring, nurturing, giving person and also allow that value to include yourself. Let's aim for that, because that's when we can actually step up and be the kind of people we aspire to be and make a difference.
What's one habit you've perhaps introduced into your life recently, or even a habit that you've got rid of that's helping you feel happier and healthier?
Okay. Right. There are 2. The habit that I would say that relates to what we're talking about today in its essence is tenderness. I'm tender with myself. But I have to share the latest change I've made is that I've gone coffee free.
Oh.
I haven't gone caffeine free, but I've gone coffee free. I broke up with coffee about 3 months ago, and I can't tell you the power that's given me to regulate my emotional response, tolerate stress. My goodness, it's been really profound. So that's the habit that I've changed. Now, look, I'm a perimenopausal, highly sensitive person, so not everyone else might need to make a drastic habit change like that. But I tell you what, for me, it's been life-changing, and I will never go back.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it kind of, it's one of those ones where it puts me a bit on edge, because then I have to look at my own coffee habits. And I am wondering whether I've slowly kind of crept up to more of the 4 coffees a day and quite strong coffees, because I've kind of got used to the taste. And now I'm at this point, and now I'm wondering, why do I feel so much more on edge than I used to? And, you know, the idea that it might be that I'm drinking too much coffee, it's like, I don't want to face that yet. But actually, I think I might have to, and I might have to see what happens if I dial it back. And I have tried that actually recently, you know, having just 1 caffeinated and a few more decaf coffees during the day. And maybe it's making a bit of a difference. So I think it's an interesting one to bring up.
It can make a difference to our self-talk. That's why, you know, I just gently offer these things up where people, it's a pick and mix. Take what you will, yeah?
And the last one, if you could give everyone in the world 1 book, which book would you give them?
Oh, do you know what? I would love to give everyone the gift of rest. So I'm going to say Rest to Reset, my last book, because it's all about how we can nourish ourselves and pace ourselves compassionately.
And that was the topic the last time we spoke, wasn't it? Which was, I don't know how long ago that was, but we talked about, it was great. You kind of busted some myths around rest and the types of rest and things like that. So it was really, really good. So yeah, everyone check out that book for sure. And what's next? What's in the pipeline for you? More another book coming up?
I do actually, and do you know what? I'm looking out the window and thinking it's not so wildly off topic. My next book is Self-Care for Winter, so I'm looking forward to sharing all of the practices that can help us not just weather but actually thrive in the winter months. So that's out in September.
Yeah, that sounds like an important topic, because how many of us we just end up not feeling ourselves, do we? Because of the darker days, and maybe we're not moving our bodies so much and things like that. So that sounds like it's going to be a really useful read.
It's how we can honor that impulse to hibernate without stagnating.
Nice. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I knew you'd have that angle of kind of, we have to, I guess, adapt to the seasons and not just keep going.
Yeah.
I knew you weren't going to say, oh, it's about winter, but you just need to keep going. That actually maybe we need to adapt, but not stagnate. That's a really interesting way of putting it.
Exactly. We have to keep moving. We've got to keep moving, but move in different ways.
Love it. And people that want to connect with you and see things that you share on social media and things, where's the best place to find you?
Come hang out with me on Instagram. We have some really wonderful conversations there.
Love it. Well, thanks so much again, Suzy. Really appreciate your time this morning. It's been great to catch up, and hopefully we'll do a third episode in the near future.
Yes. Yeah. When I've got the antidote to not enoughness, absolutely. Let's do another one.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Sam.
Cheers, Suzy.
Always a pleasure. Cheers.
Okay, thanks for tuning in. I really hope you found my conversation with Suzy insightful. If you did enjoy the episode, please do share it with friends, family, and colleagues who you think would find it helpful too. You can also support the podcast by following and rating the show on whichever app you're listening on. Thanks again, and I look forward to bringing you another episode soon.